Hello and welcome back to English Not Permitted, the only channel on YouTube dedicated entirely to foreign language film and TV shows. And in this episode today, we're going to focus on A Taste of Cherry, a 1997 minimalist drama written, produced and directed by Abbas Kiarostami and starring Humayun Ashadi. This is one of the films on the BBC Top 100 Foreign Films list that I'm working my way through on this channel, and it ranks at number 97. The director Kiarostami has 3 films on the list, and this is the lowest ranked out of all of them, which makes me excited to see his other work because this one is a pretty good film. I think it's interesting he's one of only 2 Iranian directors on this list, even though for some of my research recently, it looks like Iranian cinema is one that I've got to check out a bit more because it seems to have a rich history and a lot of talented people coming from Iranian cinema. Especially because, as I'm going to discuss in this video, I'm not particularly familiar with the region. I've never traveled to the Middle East before. And obviously, watching films about a country is a good way to get to know about it. So this is ranked by the BBC as a 97th best foreign language film ever made. And I'm a little shocked it's not higher. This is a very, very good film. And I think it's actually better than some of the films that come way ahead of it. Maybe one day I'll do some sort of rearranging of how I would rank the list. And I think this is one that I would put significantly higher. So, what's the film about?
The plot revolves around a middle-aged man from Tehran who drives through a city suburb in search of someone willing to carry out the task of burying him after he commits suicide. When we first see the protagonist, he can be seen driving around trying to spark up a conversation with passersby, and it's not clear at first why he's so anxiously trying to find someone to speak to. The tension is first sparked up after one person even threatens to beat him up if he doesn't leave him alone, but the protagonist continues to frantically offer the man help. The rest of the film revolves around the simple idea, getting someone to bury his body after he's killed himself. And this twisted road trip takes us around the suburbs and dry, arid outskirts of Tehran, a fitting setting given the dreary topic of the film. Along the way, we get to meet an eclectic mix of Iranian and Middle Eastern characters.
So I actually thought this was a brilliant film, and 97th best film probably doesn't do it justice. I'd be shocked if there's 96 films better than this on this list. But I hope I'm wrong. So what did I like about this film? Well, it's such a simple film. I'm going to dive a little more into the direction and the acting in a minute. However, pretty much the entire time, the camera is directed at the main character, Mr. Badi's face. So you pretty much for the whole time get to see his reactions to conversations. And the film kind of relies on these subtle facial gestures to portray a lot of meaning. As you find out more about the character's motivations, the fact that he wants to kill himself, it really just allows the actor to shine because we're relying on his subtle facial movements to kind of convey his distress, which he does excellently. The film racks up in intensity the more you find out about the character and the more you see his failed attempts to get someone to help him commit suicide. One of the kind of eerie things about this film is that he seems to be quite a charming and intelligent person, and you end up rooting for the character, which I suppose in this case means you're kind of rooting for him in a way that means you want someone to help him kill himself. And I think credit goes to the actor there for playing him because you can kind of see the desperation and how much he actually wants this. Like I said, Iran is not a country I'm particularly familiar with, so I like learning a little bit about Iranian culture in this film. One slight frustration I had when watching this film, and I'm sure it's something that many other people watching this film will have, is that unfamiliarity with Iranian culture may lead to some misunderstandings, or if not misunderstandings, a lack of complete comprehension of what's going on and what's being said. Now, this is a common problem with foreign language cinema, unless you're pretty proficient in the language or the culture of the movie. But I think in this film it was noticeable when the main character, Mr. Badi, has a conversation with an Afghan refugee, and they sit and talk about some of the differences between the two cultures and their history. It was interesting to hear, but a lot of it went over my head. This lack of knowledge by no means ruins the experience though. In fact, it probably enhances it, because now by watching this film I get to learn a little bit more about it. However, it does kind of feel like you're missing out on certain cultural in-jokes. I think it's interesting that this film was made in 1997 in Iran of all places, because I don't think I've ever actually seen a film that takes such a sympathetic look towards a person contemplating committing suicide. Often in cinema, there's 2 ways of looking at someone who commits suicide. Someone who is either mentally weak and suffering too much, or as a victim. And in this one, I think he's kind of neither of them. He's someone who desperately wants to end his life. We're never sure why, which I think adds to the intrigue. And I'm sure it adds to the realism too, as it's not so often that we ever find out the reasons why someone kills themselves. So I think in that sense, in its sympathetic look towards suicide, I think it's kind of ahead of its time too. So at this point I want to analyse some of the scenes and some of the directorial choices in a bit more detail. I'm not going to give away the end of the film in this section. However, if you haven't seen it, maybe you want to go watch the film first and then come back and look at this analysis.
Both the actor and director shine in this film. Humayun Ershadi gives a tragically great performance of a desperate man determined to end his life, but he owes at least some credit though to some of the creative decisions made by director Kiarostami. Kiarostami chooses to use long, close-up shots of Ershadi throughout the film. This is most notable during dialogue with other characters. The director chooses to keep the shot on Ershadi's face, even when the other character is speaking. This allows the audience to focus in on Ershadi's subtle sense of desperation as he tries to guide the conversation towards his suicide. Another trick Kiarostami uses is the wide-angle shot, which creates a sense of distance with the audience and isolation around the subject. There are many shots of the protagonist driving alone on a dry, arid road with no one in sight. Although we never get to know the reason why he wants to kill himself, these shots help to drive home the point that this is an isolated and lonely man. This is never done better than towards the climax of the film, where we see the protagonist wrestle with a decision that he has to make. We can never see his face or hear his words, but the fear, anxiety, and frustration is clear through his body language alone.
So just to reiterate, I'm extremely glad I decided to watch this film. This is probably going to be one of my favorite films on the list, I think. And it makes me extremely happy that I took on the challenge to watch the top 100 foreign language films, because I probably never would have chosen to put this on otherwise. And I recommend that you do too. This is a simple but powerful film that takes it in the mind of a man at his most desperate, trying to commit suicide. In a film that takes us across Tehran to see a whole range of working class Iranian characters. And this film left me thinking about it for days afterwards. Thank you very much for watching. My next review from the BBC Top 100 is going to be Wild Strawberries, a Swedish film by Ingmar Bergman. So if you could give me a little like and subscribe to the channel, that'll be on next week.